Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonians.
It is Easter Sunday in the United States of America and much of the world among Protestants, Catholics, and some Orthodox. In Macedonia, among the Macedonian Orthodox faithful, it is Palm Sunday, and yet very few people are in churches this Sunday. In Macedonia, and as we record this, Macedonians are under total lockdown in a government-imposed curfew for 61 hours over the weekend that even medical experts around the world are, even now, debating. Are these extreme measures needed or helpful? Or do they do more damage in so many other ways? Macedonia's health minister just said that these weekend lockdowns may continue until the middle of May. In the United States, the 50 governors implement their own policies, though most of the U.S., like most of the world, is under some type of lockdown. Meanwhile, life, such as it is these days, goes on. The Anti-Corruption Commission in Macedonia filed charges against former Chief Special Prosecutor Cvetin and 9 of her colleagues, accusing them of failing to report extra earnings in their annual reports. Again, these folks were a part of the Special Prosecutor's Office, the crown jewel in the government of Zoran Zaev, supported and applauded by the United States, the European Union, NATO, and many others. In other news, in what might be considered a, quote, Friday news dump, unquote, the former so-called name negotiator, Matt Nimetz, released a paper on his experience as the name negotiator, titled tellingly, quote, The Macedonian Name Dispute, the Macedonian Question Resolved, unquote, with a question mark at the end. We'll discuss all of this and more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the mostly free and sovereign state of Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Shilimanov calling in from the totally police state of Macedonia.
I am so sorry.
Yeah.
And to see what I read this morning about the health minister there saying that this could continue through the middle of May. And here we are, we're not even in April 15th. We're not even in the middle of April. And he's saying this could go on for over another month.
Yeah. We're definitely getting police curfew for Easter. Maybe even longer than this one. This is almost 3 days. It started Friday in the afternoon and lasts until Monday early morning. We're recording on Sunday evening and Macedonian time, and I still have like a night to go. And for Easter we would have probably like 4 days. Like it would start maybe on Thursday and last until Monday or something like that.
Why?
The theory they're putting forward is that if we lock down everything for 2 weeks, it would be best, because everybody who has the virus would, burn through it, and everybody else would be at home and not affected, and this would put an end to it. But
okay, well let's take this logically though. Okay, let's just say that tomorrow, like Thanos, we snap our fingers and everybody is free of the virus within the borders of the Republic of Macedonia.
Okay.
People still leave Macedonia and people still come into Macedonia after that point.
Well, not
if
now.
You are going...
Borders are closed.
No. But if tomorrow we were like Thanos to snap our fingers and it was all gone in Macedonia, you still would have people coming into Macedonia after that point, and people that are going to be infected. And so are you going to require them to quarantine for 14 days? That will kill tourism and it will kill business forever.
I guess we'll continue quarantining the elderly, but start opening up the factories and restaurants and stuff like that. But again, there is another theory that it's best that we all contract it as soon as possible, because obviously we have at this point we still have the hospital capacity. We have 4 hospitals treating corona patients, 2 of them seriously, 2 of them on a temporary basis, and the milder cases. And they're not overwhelmed. Now, I don't know how much more capacity they have, but I think it will take longer if we, I mean, not to mention the damage to the economy. There are some estimates that it will even do more damage to the elderly if we keep getting this, if we keep pulling off the band-aid slowly, because then we'll just have a flare-up in, in 2 weeks. Then we'll have another flare-up in a month and a half or something. So it's going to kill more people, is the estimate, if we get the collective immunity slower, I think. Made sense to me when I was reading it.
Well, yeah, and we have all been reading so much and listening to so much, and there's so many theories, and you would hope that the so-called experts would be able to come up with some definitive theories about this. Of course, we don't just take experts at their word. They need to be challenged as well. I think about Dr. Anthony Fauci, who I think is a good man, head of the National Institutes for Health, and he said, on January 21, he said, well, obviously we have to take it seriously and follow the things like the CDC and DHS are doing, but this is not a major threat to the people of the United States, and this is not something that the citizens of the United States should right now be worried about. He said that on January 21. Obviously, he's changed his tune, as so many others have, and he is, the expert on infectious diseases, and so we need some better guidance. I understand this is this is called the novel coronavirus, which means new, and so it's something that the world hasn't seen before, and you've got researchers, scientists.
Virus.
What's that?
It's the China virus. It came
China,
from
China. The Wuhan flu.
Or the yellow fever. Okay.
Well, but all these people are suggesting all these different ways of doing it. You talk about doing a total lockdown in a country the size of Vermont, Macedonia, whereas here in the United States, as I mentioned in the opening monologue, it's the 50 governors that make these decisions. So the President of the United States, just so our listeners understand, the President of the United States cannot just shut down the country. Yeah. And it's kind of like you just can't, you don't shut down the economy, and you don't just start the economy with the flip of a switch. It doesn't work that way. It's not the way at least this country is built. Maybe in a place like Macedonia, you can tell everybody to shut down for 2 weeks, although even then you can't, because literally people have to eat. You still have to have grocery stores and pharmacies. You still have to have fire, police, health workers, etc. The army still needs to be at ready. So this idea that you can just shut down a physical location for a certain amount of time without anything going on doesn't exist. Yeah. So you've got to figure out other ways of doing it. It's kind of like, again, going back to the 50 governors in a country that goes from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic to Pacific. You can't just tell people in Wyoming, which is so sparsely populated, that you've got to stay at home or anything like that. I mean, Michigan, the governor of Michigan, who, by the way, Joe Biden is now thinking about Gretchen Whitmer, whatever her last name is. He's considering her as a possible vice presidential pick. This weekend, actually it was Friday or Saturday, she said, Michigan citizens cannot go across the street to visit their neighbor. I'm sorry, that's totalitarian. Here we are recording this on Sunday, April 12, which is Easter Sunday, as I mentioned in the monologue, here in the States and for much of the Catholic and Protestant world. Last week you had authorities in Kentucky telling churches in Kentucky, some churches said they were going to go ahead and have services today. The authorities were telling these churches that if you do that, we will take photographs of the license plates of the cars parked at the church, and then we will send out authorities, police and others, to the homes of those parishioners and tell them they must lock down for 14 days. So they're doing that to the church, but do they do that to the grocery store? Do they do that in the Walmart parking lot? That sounds
like something we would be doing here, and even that, like 30, 40 years ago, not now.
Exactly. So as our Cvetin is our friend John Gabriel, who we both follow on Twitter, who's one of the editors for Ricochet, conservative website, podcast, etc. lives in the Phoenix area, I think in Mesa. He tweeted out the other week, last week, he said, it's going to be amazing to see the number of lawsuits that appear after this.
Yeah.
And there will be a lot of lawsuits, at least in this country, where we are so happy. I don't know about Macedonia there. But this is the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. So let's talk about Macedonia a little bit more. Yeah. You're under total lockdown. It's going to go through mid-May, according to the wise and the learned and the sagacious Vinko Filipce, the health minister, and Prime Minister Spasovsky and his sidekick, or actually Zoran Zaev and his sidekick Oliver Spasovsky.
Sure.
And by the way, Zaev and Miskovsky apparently were in the presence of a journalist last week who tested positive. Tell us about that.
Yeah, they were both interviewed by Goce Mihailovsky. He's an editor at Kanal Pit TV, and he interviewed them. One was like on Thursday, the other was on Friday, like back to back. And then, literally days later, or actually before this, Goce visited some family in Prilep. Some of the family members was positive. Then Goce developed symptoms after the interviews, so he theoretically could have infected them. They say they both said they were keeping distance, but now they're both in self-isolation in home. Zaev in Strumica, Miskovsky in Skopje, giving Miskovsky is giving daily video addresses. Zaev hasn't been seen. Right. Both tested negative initially, but this still takes a while to develop if Goce gave it to them, and they say they didn't handshake, they kept a distance, but it's a very weird situation. Both the leaders of the two main political parties are detained at home, essentially. They can't leave their house on the penalty of being fined, and it's a very, very, very strange situation.
It is surreal, yeah. So you said Zaev hasn't been seen since he self-quarantined?
He hasn't done a video address, I think, yet. He posts stuff online. He posted most laughably some initiative that we are forgiven, debt forgiveness. At a time that when we're still waiting for the loans to be made, IMF, World Bank, and now he's signing up to a petition that they forgive our debt. And, again, he should first get the money and then ask the money. I mean, who's going to borrow you money if you're at the same time promoting, like, I'm not paying this back, right? I mean, we understand this, right?
Yeah.
If you're saying that at the same time. So this is his initiative at the moment.
Oh. Well, we certainly hope that neither Zaev nor Miskovsky tests positive and that they don't come down with this. And what's the journalist's name again? Goce
Mihailovsky.
Okay, yeah, we certainly hope that he recovers from this illness as well.
Yeah, he's a key kid. I mean, we're hoping for the best.
Yeah. I know that everything nowadays, news-related, podcast-related, whatever, governments, everything is centered around the coronavirus. But there is other news going on. Let's touch on that briefly. As I mentioned in the opening monologue, Katice Yaneva and 9 of her colleagues were, they had charged, the Anti-Corruption Commission filed charges against them. So obviously these cases are still going on in the middle of this. What's that all about?
Yeah, these are additional charges. Yeah. I mean, Vilmara has been pointing out that Katice is crooked, since literally after her appointment, and everything they said turned out to be correct, even more, there was failure of imagination, just exactly how crazily corrupt she would turn out to be. But none of this was taken seriously. Obviously, she was very needed to bring SDSM in power and impose the name change in Macedonia. Finally, it was an investigation through IRI. They created they funded the creation of a the International Republican Institute. They came up with this tool which lets you cross-reference who is being paid by the budget on anything other than a regular salary basis, and it turned out that Katice is being paid hundreds of thousands of euros on top of a very sizable salary, and on top of the tens of millions of euros she extorted from businesses in her criminal enterprise. So this earned her an additional charge. She took more than 100,000 euros in bonuses. Other prosecutors had up to 100,000,
Wow.
tens of thousands of euros. Illegally, they should have reported the money and it should have appeared on their returns. So this is actually getting sloppy at the end. They weren't even reporting their full, which is basically an extra salary, but bonuses on their salary. But you should report this. I mean, this is noticeable. This is not something you can hide from the public. So they face now additional charges. Meanwhile, the trial was postponed because a prisoner died in the Skopje, in the Shutke investigative prison, where they detain you before trial while you're attending trial, and the prisoner was apparently living, cellmates or cell neighbors with Boki 13.
Oh, no.
So the courts have insisted on continuing the trials in Macedonia, although everything else is shut down. Vomera people were being sentenced while the epidemic is ongoing. Even Dui people were sentenced as a message to them before the elections, if we eventually get to elections. But
if, the operative word, if.
But eventually this trial was postponed because there is a non-zero chance that Boki 13 was, he says, I shared a bathroom with this guy, I shared, we were brought food by the same guard. So now everybody in the prison is being tested, the guards are being tested, and it's a whole mess there.
Wow. So they oddly, not to be too grim about it, but they're trying to figure out how to Epstein him one way or the other, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh. All right, so the trials are ongoing. The Special Prosecutor's Office, which again was the crown jewel of the government of Zoran Zaev and supported ad nauseum by the United States, European Union, NATO, etc., that is in shambles. Those trials are continuing in fits and starts. In other news, as I mentioned, Nimetz, Ambassador Matthew Nimetz, who was the so-called name negotiator for 345 years, apparently, until Zoran Zaev rode in on his white horse to rescue Macedonia from its name and its identity. He released a paper the other day, which was part of something larger, I think, but it was kind of odd, the timing that it was released, because it's in the middle of this whole coronavirus thing. And so maybe the idea was not to give it too much credence or publicity. And we're not going to get into it here, but and I've already read it and highlighted it, and I'm going to be writing about it. We'll discuss it more at length later. But the title of it is The Macedonian Name Dispute, the Macedonian Question Resolved, with a question mark at the end of resolved. So that's the important point. Is it resolved? And the conclusion that he comes to is, well, it remains to be seen. So, and the thing I find fascinating about that is that everybody in the European Union, the United States State Department, NATO, and all the embassies and all the think tanks and George Soros and all of his people and civil society groups, etc., said, this is now resolved. And then Matt comes up with a paper that says, well, is it? And of course the answer is no.
And the final scene of a horror movie.
Yeah. But remember, there's the final scene of a horror movie. Yes, there was Halloween, and then there was Halloween 2 and Halloween 3 and Halloween. It doesn't end. So no, it's not resolved. Why? Because Macedonians have a right to their own name and their own identity, and the government of Zoran Zaev, aided and abetted by Western elites, forced Macedonians to give that up, which is something that they did not want to do, as they said in the referendum of September 30, 2018. And so it's not resolved. And so this is, I don't know how we're going to do this. We're going to have to figure out a way to, maybe every September 30 we should do a special podcast dedicated to this. But anyway, so that was some other news. There was another piece that you sent offline before we started this. Let me look here, about Deutsche Welle.
There was also another piece before we get to Deutsche Welle.
Okay.
There was a piece by Chris Hill as well, in the Hill, the former U.S. ambassador to Macedonia.
Yes.
And both him and Nimetz, it was very strange. They literally, obviously, they completely ignored the way in which Zaev was brought to power, the abuses of democratic norms, the coup essentially in Macedonia, and the colored revolution, which was funded by the U.S. government and the EU missions here. So they obviously ignored all this. Mm-hmm. But they also ignored, which was strange for me, this was the main talking point in the past, they ignored Gruevski's period and his period of essentially boosting Macedonian pride and patriotism, which was, reviled endlessly by all these people, by all these commentators, the journalists who would support people like Nimetz and Chris Hill. And I don't know why they were ignoring this, unless it is because it's getting awkward now. It's getting, we had a point. We were not just opposing the name issue for, resolving the name issue or acquiescing, making concessions to the Greeks for no good reason. There are very good reasons which we had for not wanting to do this, and this is going to become more and more apparent as we're apparently entering the end game for Kosovo, which all of these same people are now horrified about. There's a third article by James Perdue. Did you see this?
Oh yes, yeah, that was in. Was that in the Hill
US
as well?
Mediator. Not sure where.
Yeah.
The U.S. mediator in 2001, and he's horrified about Kosovo. He's obviously, on the Kosovo-Albanian side, as he was in 2001, when the U.S. sent him here as an ostensibly honest broker between Macedonians and Albanians. Now he's obviously 100% concerned about what happens with the Albanians in the future, and they're all scared that there's going to be partition in Kosovo. Right. And they're blaming Trump of pushing this forward, and Perdue even blames Trump of doing this for the Russians, as a favor to the Russians, under hypnosis from the Russians. So in all of this, on one hand, you have to do the ha-ha scene from The Simpsons, because they were all involved in toppling a government, a legitimate government in Macedonia, through the State Department, and now they cry bloody murder that what little of the State Department works for Trump was involved in toppling a government in Kosovo, which they like. So it's excellent, for Schadenfreude purposes. But on the other hand, it's in any way, obviously Kosovo is a far greater problem than Macedonia, and in any end game in Kosovo, we would have much better been served with Macedonia being led by a legitimate government supporting Macedonian interests, instead of this Frankenstein monster of a government we have now, if not for no other reason, for stability. Because if Kosovo explodes as part of a mangled border change, Macedonia blows up the next morning. Any chance we had of containing this would have been with Gruevski in charge, but now thanks to all these people, that chance is lost.
Right. Well, maybe we can put a link to those articles.
Yeah, we're in curfew. What else is there to do? We can just read.
Well, and
Nimetz and Chris Hill and Perdue.
Yeah, and then the Deutsche Welle one, which you, I'd seen it during the week, but I really didn't dive into it. So it was a editorial on the Macedonian news service of Deutsche Welle, right? Yeah. Okay, tell us more about that.
Oh, it's written by Ljubco Popovski, who is a far left, but bitterly left person, condescending toward the right, and it shows. It drips in every sentence he writes in this editorial, and it's they do this a lot. There are other similarly condescending and bitter people writing there, like Katarina Blazhevska, but it's shocking that it would be published by a state-run news outlet like Deutsche Welle, and the topic was the fact that we received assistance from countries like Hungary and Turkey and Slovenia initially, and Hungary and Slovenia made a point to deliver the aid through VMRO, because we are sister parties, VMRO SDS in Slovenia and Fidesz in Hungary. So this was specifically, we're doing this for our friends in the conservative movement in Macedonia. Turkey made a point that the assistance is coming, primarily to their Muslim brothers in Macedonia. Again, not necessarily for the government of Zaev and Spasovsky. China is sending a lot of assistance. You could sense that the US embassy, the EU embassy were uncomfortable with this.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have this ridiculous situation where the EU ambassador would tweet that, well, look, you're getting assistance from EU member states bilaterally. Wouldn't mention that these are the member states which are hated by the people like the EU ambassador normally. Right. And Zaev is declaring that he wants to bring Fidesz down and Orban down, and the aid was delivered, the Hungarian aid was delivered by the Hungarian foreign minister, who was asked about this, and he had very, a good talking to about Zoran Zaev.
Yes.
He said, we don't care what Zaev thinks about us. He's not Hungarian. So the NATO representative was tweeting, look, you're in NATO now, and NATO countries are helping you like Turkey. That's such a stretch to say that Turkey is helping us because we're in NATO. If anything, there was a danger that Turkey will not send any assistance and that they're withholding ventilators because Zaev signed on to a Greek-promoted plan to impose very limited sanctions against a few people in Turkey because of Turkey drilling around Cyprus.
Right.
So we are signing on with Greece against Turkey, which is unprecedented in our recent history. And still they deliver aid, but no aid from Greece, for example. And now the Deutsche Welle guys, they insisted, but look, the EU is going to send us eventually at some point 60 million euros. Again, it's coming through a Visegrad-appointed European commissioner, the Hungarian guy who is now in charge of enlargement. The US embassy gave us 1.1 million, which is laughable. We are
Actually, it wasn't the US embassy, it was the American people.
Yeah, of course, but everybody's portraying the aid like,
sure.
I provided this. Yeah. And then finally, another Visegrad country, the Czech Republic, sent like 1 million masks, and now the editorial was, look, and the Czech Republic sent us aid, and it was bitter in the sense that why are we talking about the aid as coming from the Visegrad countries, and not as aid coming from NATO, even though it's Turkish aid, and coming from the EU, even though it's Slovenian and Hungarian aid. So it was it compared, it's quoting Apocalypse Now, it's talking about beating up, defeating the populist movements. And, Wimmerer responded as a political party to this editorial and said that, Deutsche Welle has some explaining to do, that this is clearly written by the SDSM party spokespeople. So it was really, we wouldn't notice it if it was just a screed in a leftist outlet here, but it was in a state-funded news outlet.
Right, Deutsche Welle. So, yeah. Well, it's like, it's kind of like the equivalent of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty here, or National Public Radio, which are both funded by U.S. taxpayers, and they are very far left in their reporting and their analysis. And, as free market conservatives, Cvetin, you and I both believe that the government should not be in the business of reporting the news. It's up to the private sector. So, here we've been trying to defund these organizations for a long time, and we'll continue to try and do that. But
no conservatives work in these outlets. I worked briefly for the BBC, and it was my best paid, business job experience in my life, and also my worst job experience in my life. Yeah. I lasted 6 months. It was so deranged. And thank God, BBC at least is defunded their Balkan services.
Yeah. Speaking of the BBC, as a quick aside, it's great to see that Boris Johnson is out of hospital now, resting at Chequers. that was quite a shock to see that he would go into the hospital and then into intensive care. But
Yeah.
I'm very glad that he is out, and wish him a speedy recovery, and so that he can go back to the helm of leading the British people during this time.
Yeah. Speaking of people getting back to the helm of their people, there is a non-zero chance that Gruevski was in the Hungarian plane. I keep posting pictures of, the guards or the entourage of the Hungarian foreign minister. Everybody's wearing masks, and a few of them kind of look like Nicola.
Wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah, we're trolling the left with this incessantly.
Are we trying to wring out some delicious liberal tears?
Well, I mean, listen, both Mickovsky and Zaev are in quarantine now. Somebody's got to do this, and who better? I mean, he guided us through the meltdown of 2008, 7-8. What was it? With just a minor bump in the drop in the GDP for 1 year, and then of course by the next year we've been busily rebuilding Skopje, so we economically nobody noticed that the world is in meltdown.
Yeah. Well, speaking of
now he can build us another city.
There we go. Yeah.
Another downtown.
Speaking of the economy, I see that the finance minister there has proposed a 2 dinar per liter increase in the gasoline petrol tax at a time when globally the price of oil is just crashed, mainly because of the issue, because of the squabble between OPEC and Russia, although I think they've resolved that. But it's just absolutely incredible to see gasoline prices here under $2 a gallon, which is roughly 50 cents a liter, which is roughly how many dinars? 25?
Yeah.
22
like
dinars a liter. 22 dinars a liter. And what is the price of gas there now?
Cheap. It's
not that you're driving anywhere.
Yeah, I haven't checked in weeks.
Have you been?
I obviously filled.
Have you checked your car to see if the tires have gone flat while it sits there?
Yeah, I filled the tank, expecting that at some point I may have to flee Skopje, and I'm still like a month ago, and I'm still good. Still haven't spent enough to make it worth my while to go to the gas station. I guess it makes sense economically. No, I don't know how much money this would bring to the budget because nobody's driving anything. We're having total meltdown. All the big factories which Gruevski brought to the country, they're closed because they have thousands of people, and the risk of contagion is so big that they stopped exporting. And even if they would export stuff to Germany, they're just a small cog in the big automotive machine, and that doesn't run without parts from China and elsewhere. Right. So that stopped spending. Consumer spending is reduced to the bare necessities. Everybody flocks to the supermarkets, and that's it. So the downturn is going to be enormous. We're expecting like 4-7% drop in GDP for the year, and a hole in the budget between 700 million and 1.3 billion out of 4 billion, which is going to be enormous. And our finance minister is a girl who used to run a website for like discounts for massages and trips, ski trips to Bansko. Like Groupon in the US, right, I think it's called. This is called Grouper. She just copied the system, and she's doing it here, and so out of her depth, it's ridiculous. Even an exceptionally competent finance minister, I'm not sure what he or she would be doing at this situation. And we have, this positive affirmative action finance minister. It's I don't know. You have to laugh because if we took this seriously.
Yeah, well, and to your point that what would any minister of finance do in any country now? It's hard to say, and cut them a little bit of slack for that, for not just for the finance ministers but for the governments. But one thing is that I mean, I do believe that the planet is going to go into a global, definitely a global recession, probably a global depression, depending on when things start getting back to quote-unquote normal. And the more I read, the more I listen to folks, obviously, I think it's going to be a rolling restart, at least speaking for the United States in a regional manner, because, you know, the situation here in southern Arizona is not the same as the situation in New York City, obviously, for a lot of reasons. Now, and I think when you get to a smaller polity like Macedonian society, you might have to take a different approach there. I don't know, but you know, this whole idea again that you can just shut down the economy for 2 weeks or 2 months. I mean, it was Bill Gates at the beginning of April, I think, who said that we should shut down the country for 10 weeks. 10 weeks is 2.5 months. Bill Gates hasn't been in a grocery store in 35 years. He has not had to earn a living because of his genius, obviously, and we need billionaires and inventors like him. But we're very grateful for how the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is donating generously to those in need and to research and all that. But he's obviously grown out of touch with, you know, the average American and men and women who, you know, work at restaurants and live paycheck to paycheck, and you can't do that. And I don't profess to have the answers, but I know that there are people out there that you know, government and industry that can get together and figure out how to do that. You know, Anthony Fauci, again, I quoted him earlier from January 21. On April 7, he said, talking about the economy and everything else, he says, quote, "I know it's difficult. We're having a lot of suffering and a lot of death. This is inconvenient from an economic and a personal standpoint, but we just have to do it." Well, inconvenient? Yeah, I suppose you could say it's inconvenient. Now, this is a man, again, I think his heart's in the right place. He's doing all he can. He's brilliant. But he's got a guaranteed paycheck for all of his life. So it's inconvenient. I think it's a little more than inconvenient. So there's got to be a way to do this. And the answer is not just shutting everything down for 2 weeks or 2.5 months. Again, here I'm speaking on Sunday, April 12th, Easter Sunday here in Arizona. Grocery stores are open, as they should be. Pharmacies are open. I just watched a neighbor walk going down to the golf course at the country club. Now, the restaurant at the country club is closed, of course, available for takeout. But, you know, and they practice social distancing, quote unquote, on the golf course. I can't see anything wrong with that. I defy you to tell me, you know, unless one golfer is going up to another golfer and coughing in his or her face, then you have other issues. You know, after we finish this, I'm going to go, I got up late this morning, so after this, I'm going to go for my daily hike near my home here, a beautiful hiking trail at the foot of the mountains. There will be other people on that trail. But, you know, we step aside when one person is coming in one direction or the other direction. I have to run to the grocery store a little bit later to pick up something, so I'll keep my distance from people. But you know, things have to be open. You can't just shut them down.
Other than a few high-density areas in both the U.S. and in Macedonia, everything else should be open. I mean, I don't really see how this is. And this is the hinterland is obviously the place where most of the stuff we need now is produced, like food and energy, and all of us in non-essential businesses from home. I mean, we will stay in our crummy little apartments, but the rest of the country should be functioning. I'm amazed that as much of the U.S. has acquiesced to this as it does.
Yeah, and again, it's not, you know, a lot of businesses and others started shutting down. I mean, let's take a look at the airline industry. Nobody told the airline industry to shut down, and in fact, the airline industry is not shut down. People voluntarily decided, you know what, I'm not going to fly. And so I think it was last week, there was one day when you had less than 100,000 people flying on a certain day, whereas the year before it had been like 2 million. You know, just incredible. So people aren't flying because they're afraid, although I personally think, based on what I've read, that it's safe to fly. if you take certain precautions. So that doesn't bother me at all. But the government didn't tell the airline industry to shut down. They just kind of voluntarily did it. But, you know, when the government here in Arizona, so I live in a homeowners association. We have 90 homes. We have a pool and a jacuzzi. We had to shut that down. And in my opinion, there's no reason to shut it down. You don't get this from swimming. The pool is the pH and alkaline chlorine balances are appropriately maintained. You know, touching.
The jacuzzi is warm enough.
Sorry?
To kill the jacuzzi is warm enough to kill the virus.
So, you know, things like that, the government overreached. But again, to what John Gabriel said about the lawsuits that are going to happen after this, well, we'll have to wait and see on that. So, anyway.
We had, I mean, okay, we are a far more totalitarian country, legacy of the past, and people are like meekly obeying orders and shutting stuff down, hoping that they will be made whole by the government by handouts later, which I'm not really sure is doable. But the interesting part was, for example, we have obviously low church attendance historically, and but Easter is one big, you know, draw, big ticket item in the churches, and that's being banned. And you know, Macedonian Orthodox faithful, kinda, you didn't have to tell them to stop going to the churches; they kinda stopped anyway. But the Islamic community was the champions here. They would continue relatively massively attended Friday prayers until they were asked to stop doing this, and they did. But then they apparently started asking for money because they said we're losing foot traffic and you know, donations and stuff. So at one point, Dareis, the head of the Islamic community of Macedonia, who's such a lunatic, you know, posts with swords and machine guns and you know, openly spreads hate speech against Christians. You know, wouldn't bat an eye. When it comes to cursing Christians and you know, people who stand in his way, like a judge who once wanted to remove him in favor of another mufti. He literally cursed her and then wished her that she dies. I heard you have cancer. I wish you die of cancer eventually. You know, this is the guy who heads the Islamic community in Macedonia, and
a true man of Allah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's really, if we wanted to make him up as a caricature of, you know, we couldn't do much better. And eventually, he said that unless the government funds, you know, pays up, I sent my guy to talk to the deputy prime minister, you know, who's the Albanian, because he talks to the Albanians in the government, nobody else, and still no word from them. And if there is no word, still I'm going to open up the mosques for the Friday prayers, and you know, there's no, and he's gleeful by this point. Says there is no power in the world that's going to stop the spread of the epidemic then, and this country is going to turn like Bangladesh, into Bangladesh. And the next day he was paid like 40,000-50,000 euros for a madrasa, and he's apparently angling to get more money from the government. And this was, you know, maybe the best story of the epidemic so far.
Nice little society there. Nice little society you got in Macedonia. Be a shame if it became like Bangladesh, eh, Gav?
Yeah. Biological warfare blackmail.
Wow.
By the Islamic community in Macedonia. It was
It's a headline there.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
Well,
but it worked.
I do hope, considering that next week is a Sunday in most of the Orthodox world, and especially among the Macedonian Orthodox faithful, I do hope that Gospodin Stefan considers broadcasting the Sunday services on national TV, so that at least it's not that you're shut in by choice, you're shut in by government edict.
Yeah.
And I hope that this week people will go out and get the provisions to dye the eggs and do all of the traditional events that Macedonians do for Easter. And has Zoom become a popular software application there? Are people getting used to that?
Not yet. We still do buy with Skype or Viber.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, Zoom has become a very big thing here.
We can Zoom the Easter service.
Exactly. So, hey. Yeah. So, well, that was robust. That was fun. We get tired of talking about the coronavirus, so I think we were able to talk about a couple other things that are going on in Macedonia that were non-corona related. We don't have any farmers' picks this week. I think we kind of voluntarily suspended those for the time being. But I do think we should link to the Matt Nimetz paper so that folks can judge for themselves whether or not the Macedonian question is resolved or not.
We'll give you your reading material for the quarantine.
Exactly, yeah. So, again, today is Sunday the 12th. This is episode 67 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. This will drop on Monday, so it's the day after Easter here. Easter is coming up, and we'll record again next Sunday. It's Macedonian Easter. I don't know what... I can guess what your plans are, Cvetin.
Yeah. I mean, my busy social life, I'll try to find some time for a podcast.
Okay, well, until then, Christos Voskrese.
Vaistina Voskrese.
Yes.
Take care, y'all.
You too.